We are really excited to be here on Cool Cat Carolina's channel, and if you don't recognize us, we're Dirt Patch Heaven. We have been on a tiny house, RV, small living adventure for about 8 months now, and we're doing it with 2 children and 2 dogs, which may not have been the smartest configuration we could have thought of to take on this trip, but it was a very realistic group, because I think most people couldn't leave their pets at home. I think that tiny living would be really kind of a sad, lonely experience without your pets. And traveling with children is also the best way to travel, is to travel with the people and the animals that you care about the most, because it's supposed to be about being with family, not about stripping yourself of everything to go on an adventure. We've lived in a teeny tiny RV. We've lived in a rental car. We've lived in friends' bedrooms. We've lived in friends' construction trailers. We haven't done it in a tent yet, but that's our next leg of the trip, is to see what it's like to live in a minivan with a tent.
And a box trailer is on the way as well. So.
Yeah. So I think that the gist of having one of these adventures is not necessarily to limit yourself to one kind of transportation and one kind of outcome, but instead, as you go on your journey, if you don't have too much invested in your infrastructure, it allows you to be very flexible about who you stay with and what kind of adventure you can have. What are your thoughts about our tic-tac-toe musical chair way of traveling?
I think if you are open to being flexible and not rigid in your ideology of it has to be this way, it has to be this sort of a thing, then you save yourself a lot of heartache, because life becomes very fluid when you're out here on the road. There are wide open spaces and beautiful places to explore, but there's also a little bit of excitement that can come from the unknown, and with that is also some potential dangers to look out for, I guess. I wouldn't say necessarily dangers, but concerns that someone can have being many, many miles from home or from anywhere. And if something were to break down, then there is the possibility that things don't go so well all the time, so you need to be fluid.
I think the biggest thing that we've learned on this trip is not the way that we want to travel, but the way that we want to live. What is the most important thing to us? What things do we care about the most? And where do we want to be? Who do we want to be there with? And so I think the biggest takeaway from a trip like this is, when you go home, what is that home going to look like? How have you changed as a person? How have you become more true to who you really are by taking this adventure and really getting rid of everything you don't care about? What, to us, that has been the point of this trip, is to say, who are we as a family? What are our priorities? Where do we want to live? Who do we want to be? How do we want to work? Do we really care about money? And one thing that has really been important for us to figure out has been the things that we've been told by media and by society about what you have to have in order to be happy. How many of those things are truly things that make you happy? And I think there is something to be said for security, and to feel like you have a safe place and that you have the money that you need, you have food, you have shelter. But beyond those basic needs, I think a lot of it is invented. I think everybody should do a journey, a pilgrimage. I guess I'll call it a pilgrimage. I think everybody should have a pilgrimage. If they're really feel like they're dying in their own life and they're trying to find clarity about who they are and what they are in their family, while it can be very difficult at times to be on this kind of stripped down pilgrimage, it does at the same time give you the freedom to really honestly look at what you want and create the dream that you want for your family, the dream that you want for your life. And it can be difficult. You have 2 adult people with different dreams in their lives, but you know, if you're finding that you're struggling in a marriage or in a relationship, a lot of times I think something like this trip can allow you to sit down and really bare bones. What is the dream for you? Well, what is the dream for you? Is there any way to really take those dreams and morph them together in a way that both of our souls feel fed? Whereas if you just stay in the rat race, a lot of times you just cover it up with things. You go buy more toys to kind of cover up the fact that you're not really living your dream. And so I think anything like that, anything cathartic is painful unless you already figured it out before you got into that pilgrimage. But I think that without that struggle, you don't really have any true revelations about really what you're doing with your life. We've had the same dream the whole time. We want to be debt-free. We want to be on a property that allows us to feel some protection and self-reliance. We both want that thing. And our dream is the same dream. We were 6 months ahead on our mortgage when John got hurt. And we had savings, we had food storage, we had the animals, we had everything we needed. What it came down to was that we had not taken time as a family in all these years. Our main goal together was pay off the debt so we can go do fun things with our family. And then we looked around and we're like, wait a minute, our kids are getting older. We're not doing fun things now. We've done all these important, amazing things, getting out of debt, being so responsible. And yet, when are we going to do these fun things? And so we looked and we're like, we could rent the house out to somebody who'll take care of the farm and who wants to be on the farm. We could go take this short trip to see, is there somewhere else we'd like to live better? We can do it all debt-free. We don't have to worry about, we had the RV that John fixed up that didn't cost us anything except just some general maintenance when we started. So we left with money in our pocket. We left with our renters taking care of our place. It was the perfect
opportunity.
Let's leave and decide what our dream is. And our dream is still the same. We want to be debt-free so that we can spend time with our family. But we're going to do it in an innovative way so that we cut all of our bills down so that we don't have to make as much money instead. So we didn't come out in this like we're going to be poor and paupers. When we got into YouTube on the road as opposed to on the farm, our income more than quadrupled because we were taking a different kind of video and we were 100% in because we had no other choice. It's not that we had savings, we had money to be able to do it, but in order to be able to do it as long as we wanted to, the YouTube had to meet us halfway, which it did. And now what it really comes down to is I really miss my farm. I don't miss my house. I want a tiny house. I still want exactly what I wanted in the beginning. I want us to be out of debt. In order to do that, instead of going back to the mortgage, we need to be in a smaller space. I still want my garden. And John doesn't want to be in the winter.
So the winters up there are brutal. There is from about the second week in January till about the end of February, it's quite common for it to be 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. And with that kind of cold, it hurts to breathe, it hurts to walk, it hurts to get up in the morning. So the only place that is actually comfortable in that type of weather is right by a fire, creating a firebox. And so at the homestead, in that sort of situation, that's the only place that I find joy. That being said, I don't really have much other preference for what I want necessarily, except that maybe to have a little bit of space. Here in Miami, it's a little crowded. There's quite a few people around. You feel like you're throwing elbows just to get through anything, and that includes on the road. So I like my wide open spaces, and I like not having the bitter, brutal cold in Idaho. Beyond that, I don't really think that there's much. Can you think of anything else that was in my...
I think we do like the flexibility of working for ourselves so that when we do have something important happen with family, we can go to help them or go to see them. If we have a certain place we want to go, I don't like living on the road because I'm a gardener. It's very hard for me to feel like I can get my fill of dirt on the road. So I don't want to be a full-time traveler. I wouldn't mind stopping for a month and living in a place for a month and getting my fill of dirt. But what we have done is we have traveled every single day up until the point we came to Florida. We were driving every single day. The longest that we stayed anywhere was a week and a half. Was it a week?
Actually, Deep South Homestead, we were there a couple
Well,
of
but
weeks.
we were living in their house.
Right.
That was different. But when we were actually traveling in the RV, I think we stayed 1 week in one place while we were waiting for the weather to cool down a little bit further down the line. So almost every day we were driving. And I don't like that. I like to have a home body, a home place for my kids. Our problem, again, has been the children. It's been that you could take children into a restroom, you had a gym out, but a lot of people would kind of be like, why are you taking your kids in there? A lot of times the gyms, children are not welcome because there's nudity inside of people dressing and undressing. And a lot of the places we traveled were exceptionally rural where there were no chains. We were going to friends who were farmers. And so unless we were going through a metropolis, we couldn't find chains. And so you'd end up going in and paying like $20. And then the whole family couldn't come in unless you got a membership for the whole family. And
Right.
truck stops.
Truck stop showers were $12 each.
Yeah,
Flying
very
J,
expensive.
as I recall, and so that was $48.
We have sworn off hotels at this point because we did have an incident where we were in a hotel that we could afford that seemed clean, and then it turned out it wasn't clean, and horrific events ensued. And so for us, I feel much safer actually being in a tent or being in this little trailer we're looking at because it's just us. I can limit the amount of people that have access to us, and I feel much safer in an RV park than I do in some of the hotel parking lots that we've parked in to stay in the hotel. I think the next thing we're looking at is Airbnbs, because a lot of times there are Airbnbs out there that have a room with a couple beds in it that's a lot cheaper than a hotel, and I feel a lot safer in them. But we haven't stayed any yet, so I don't know if they'd actually be safer or not.
Next step, yes, we want to go home. We want to double check and make sure we need to get back there because that's what we had arranged with our renters. And we are going to set them up so that the permaculture and the gardening over there, they know how that it works so that we can see that it's repeatable and that it's scalable so that somebody else could come in and take over this. Since we got here, I think that was the next step that we are both looking forward to, is just because we get homesick out here, and it's nice to be back around familiar places and familiar faces, and to be able to see the things that are very, that we grew up with.
And we have a lot of time invested in our farm. We have a gorgeous farm that works so well, and it would be nice to check in on it. And I think that I don't think we'll ever stop traveling after this. We definitely have the bug. And if we could have found a tiny house that we could have afforded, if we could have had a sponsorship with a tiny house, I think we would still keep traveling and just go to a new state every month. That would be my goal, is to be like, we'll just go for a month to each place. But an RV doesn't feel home-like enough for me to want to have my kids in it all year round, whereas I think with a tiny home with the real walls and a little bit more storage, a little bit more size, I think I would be incredibly comfortable being in a tiny home and being willing to travel all the time, because to me it just feels different.
After that, we really haven't thought terribly
But we've
far
thought
ahead.
about it a lot. We haven't decided much.
Right, we haven't decided on anything really to go from that point. But we would like to figure out how to repeat this journey in some sort of way, and I guess the rest is the details in that. Just
We don't know until
We
we
don't
go home and we trial run it whether or not the channel will follow us when we're sedentary. If it does follow us, it opens up whole bunches of windows because it would allow us to stay home and build a tiny house. But if we stop, will we be able to stop long enough to build a tiny house so we can live in it? Or do we need to have one or both of us go back to work doing something in order to be able to build something more permanent for our family and for retirement and that kind of thing? We're still very young, as far as like most people would think that at this age you would still be building a pretty big portfolio of money for later. And so we're trying to be very responsible about that because we still have young children. If it was just us, it would be different. But we have responsibilities to our children for their future, for their education, for them having a stable home. And so right now, everything that we're thinking revolves around our children and what it is that they need for the next years until they are of age. And how does this next year, or next 2 years, next 3 years affect the rest of their lives because they're still very young.
So thank you. I think it'll be interesting to see how you adapt to static living. I look forward to continuing to follow your journey, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and share with us about this great adventure you've been on.